Father, and Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. A few considerations in this feast of the solemnity of St. Pius X. Remember that myself and Father Hugo and the priests of Ast who have been given a piece of paper by which we were said to be expelled from the Society of St. Pius X. I received my piece of paper on October the 3rd in 2012, on the feast of St. Teresa, the patroness of the mission, St. Teresa the Child Jesus. And it was a great honor to receive that piece of paper. It said that it was expelled from the Society of St. Pius X by the new superiors for the new direction. And in that expulsion it is clear, as the expulsion now of more than 50 of us from the society, we're getting close to 100 priests who have been set aside from the society, cut out from the society, or departed from the society in the last 3 years since 2012. Some not members of the society or direct members of the society, but over 50 of us members of the Society of St. Pius X. And the expulsions that we received, and I received October the 3rd, the Father Giselle received October the 4th, 2012, and then Bishop Williamson received October the 8th, 2012. The same week, the three of us were expelled, received our expulsion papers. And these expulsion papers are of no value. In fact, they hold a special place of honor because it gives us an opportunity to be imitators of our founder, who received a piece of paper that said he was excommunicated, received a piece of paper that said he was no longer recognized as a bishop of the church. And yet, he remained faithful bishop from the time that he became a bishop, was consecrated a bishop, just like he was a faithful priest before that, and a faithful seminarian before that, and a faithful Catholic before that. And so he remained faithful from the baptism until the day of his death in 1991. And the only thing that he wished to do was to continue the Catholic Church, to continue the Catholic priesthood, to preserve the Catholic faith, which is what the obligation of every Catholic is according to their state in life. And all he did was fulfill his duty of state, that's all. Our Lady of Fatima said that to fulfill your duty of state in the 20th century will make saints. If you fulfill your duty of state in the 19th century, you're doing what everyone did. It's not sufficient. We must go and do more. But to even do the basic duty of state in the 20th century, there's so much of an attack against every single basic duty of motherhood, of fatherhood, of a child being a child, of a priest being a priest, of a bishop being a bishop, of everyone doing whatever their duties are. The devil is an attack against every single one of them, trying to prevent the families from having children, trying to prevent them from raising those children Catholic, trying to prevent them from having a Catholic parish, trying to prevent them from being Catholic priests, trying to prevent them from being Catholic bishops and Catholic everything. Catholic everything. And so it is a special grace to be able to persevere in just the fulfillment of the duty of state in our times. And St. Pius X was, of all the popes of the last 2,000 years, he stood up in a special way. Even though there's so many great saint popes, he stood up in a special way against the great errors of our age. And he recognized what is it that made it possible for him to do that. And what is it that's going to be necessary for the saints of the end times? We are headed into the end times. In the greatest fight between heaven and hell that there has ever been, and in the greatest fight of all the errors and all the lies and all the evil of hell versus all the goodness of heaven, and the great and final battle which we are entering into right now, what is needed? When we're in the greatest fight, when we're in the most serious time of battle, only those that have the principles of their side deep in their hearts will survive the fight. Only those that have the principles of their side so deep in their hearts that they will give up everything but not that principle. And what is the principle? St. Paul laid out clearly the principle of our faith. He said, it is charity. Well, there are these three, faith, hope, and charity. But the greatest of these is charity. If I have faith to move mountains, but have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. And all the different things that he says that we may have, but without charity, it profiteth us nothing. And so what is it that's essential? When Giuseppe Sarto was elected Pope in 1903, and he did not want to be Pope, but he was elected Pope, he recognized that what did he see? Because one thing that he was, from the time that he was ordained a priest until that day when he became the Pope, was he was always a shepherd of souls. But now as he became the Pope, he was a shepherd of shepherds. And the one encyclical that's the symbol of his whole papacy begins with the word pascendi. Pascendi Dominici Gregis. Feeding the flock of Christ. What is it that makes St. Pius X different from the popes who came before him? The popes who came before him did condemn modernism. The popes that came before him did condemn many of the errors of the 19th century. But the errors grew, and the evil expanded, and it wasn't even slowed down by their condemnations. And why was it? Because they were given an intellectual condemnation of an intellectual heresy which was useful for academics. But St. Pius X was not a man of academia. He was a parish priest. And he thought that the purpose of academia was to teach souls about the love of God, to teach souls about the knowledge and the love of God, faith, hope, and charity. And then faith, hope, and charity had to be the principles of every Catholic child, the principles of every Catholic priest, the principles of every Catholic bishop, and the principles that he would carry into his Catholic papacy when he was elected Pope. And when they elected him, they surely thought, we'll get this simple man elected, get through a few years of this idiot, and then we'll get one of our men back in. And they made a most grave mistake. They made a most grave mistake because they elected a man of faith. They were wicked cardinals that elected him. They did not have good intentions. They were wicked bishops. And the church was filled with great wickedness. And what did this shepherd do? He saw that the flock needed to be fed, and the flock was starving. They were not getting the true faith anymore. The flock was filled with poison. The flock was infected with wolves who were dressed in sheep's clothing all throughout the flock. The flock was being driven away from God. And he saw the great enormity of it. In the very first paragraphs of Pascendi, where he begins by saying, feeding the flock of Christ is the most serious duty of the shepherd of shepherds, of the father of fathers, and of every priest and everyone who has the duty of shepherd. And that in this time we have the most grave attack against the sheep that has ever been in the history of the world. And he recognized in 1907 when he wrote that encyclical in the middle of his time of being Pope, that this was the greatest attack. And the attack of 1907 is the attack of 2007. It's the attack of 2015, the year in which we are right now. It is precisely the same attack. We are not in another time. We are in exactly the same time. We are in the same period of the church that St. Pius X was in 100 years ago. It is a crisis that did not begin in the 1960s. Of course, the crisis we are talking about began at the beginning of time. Began when Adam decided to eat the forbidden fruit. It continues until the end of the world. It shall not cease. But there are stages of this battle between heaven and hell. And the present stage was in its full swing, and the devil was prepared for his great victory in 1903. And it was prevented by one shepherd, prevented by one saint, who stood up against the kingdom of hell. And how did he stand up against the kingdom of hell? By Pascendi. He recognized what we must recognize during the entirety of this crisis. It is not enough to condemn heresy. It is not enough to preach truth. The previous Leo XIII did that minimally. Pius IX did that minimally. Pius XI did that. Pius XI did it very minimally. They all did it minimally before Pius XII. But then they stopped doing it minimally after him. And they failed, with the exception of Giuseppe Sarto, with the exception of St. Pius X. Because he recognized, in order to fight the greatest heresy of all time, it is not enough to condemn it, which he did do, and it must be condemned clearly, but there must be a supernatural fight against the modern heresies. And therefore, he, for instance, said, the devil is taking away innocence from the world. The devil is destroying all innocence. The devil is fighting a great supernatural battle against heaven. Therefore we must pull out our greatest supernatural weapon. And our Lord Jesus Christ said, unless you be as little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, he commanded that all little children in every parish throughout the world must be taught the catechism from the earliest age. And the priest must make sure that there is a true catechism program in every one of his parishes. He wrote over 10 encyclicals on the catechism. And he used to, even when he was Pope, he would go out and find little children and teach them, who made you? God made me. Why did God make you? God made me to show forth His goodness, to know Him, love Him, and serve Him in this world, that I might be happy with Him in the next. That's what he thought was the most important teaching. And there he would do that even as Pope. He always taught little children from the time that he was ordained a priest until the time he died as Pope. And he said that we're going to fight a supernatural battle. What does that mean? The power of the Blessed Sacrament. When he decided to give the Holy Communion to little children at a younger age, which is what they used to be in the olden times anyway, he was doing it as a fight against modernism. He was doing it as a fight against the kingdom of hell. For the little children, when they pray with innocence, when they receive the Holy Communion, it is a war against hell. And remember also, don't forget our battle of abortion and our battle of birth control, which is part of the same battle that St. Pius X was fighting against when he said, teach children catechism, give children Holy Communion. The devil hates little children receiving Holy Communion. He hates little children's prayers. He hates little children's innocence. And then look at the special campaign of our times to destroy innocence in children. And the first way to destroy it is to murder them before they are born, so that they are no longer born in an innocent family. They're born in a family of wickedness, and they're born in a family that doesn't want them. And so what do? We have to re-establish a Catholic family. This is special in our times. And when it is done, when this happens, innocence comes back into children. Holy Communion is put back upon their tongues at an early age. Prayer comes out of their mouths, and the little prayer of these babies, these little children, defeats the kingdom of hell. St. Pius X recognized, I will not defeat modernism by teaching special classes against modernism in universities, because the modernists will twist them and shrink wrap them. He even says that in the encyclical Pascendi. The modernists use the condemnation of modernism to spread modernism. They are so wicked. They will even use the condemnation to spread it, as they did with Leo XIII, as they did with the previous condemnations. And St. Pius X mentions this in Pascendi. These men are so wicked that they can take the condemnation and use it to help their heresy. Therefore, to fight them only on the level of doctrinal condemnation will not work. It requires a supernatural battle. Enroll the children. Enroll the innocent. Enroll the young Catholic who must learn his catechism. And he said, how is it that heresy spreads? Heresy spreads because Catholics do not know their faith. If Catholics know their faith, and they know that there are 10 commandments, and someone tells them that there are 9, or there are 11.2, you tell them, go to hell. Problem solved. And the child knows the answer. The adult doesn't know the answer. The child defeats the modernist. The adult does not. And therefore he says, unless you be as little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. And this is a battle about entering the kingdom of heaven. And what does it mean? Feed the lambs, feed the lambs, feed the sheep. And so St. Pius X, seeing an impossible task, had the heart of our Lord Jesus Christ. And what did our Lord say? I am your father. I am your mother. I am your sister. I am your brother. I am everything. And he had the heart of the father, the heart of the mother. He had the heart of the whole family. And what does this heart want? It wants the children to have life. It wants the children to be ready for heaven. And without this kind of heart, it is impossible to fight in our times. Because when you walk out the door of our little bitty chapel, what do you see? Millions of devils, millions of enemies, millions of darts, all kinds of weapons are gathered against Christ and His church. What is to be done? We cannot shoot back against all of them. We cannot put up a shield to block all of them. And so it seems overwhelming to us, and therefore we retreat. But what did David do? David charged into the impossible battle. What did Judith do? She ended the enemy with one move into the camp. She went into the camp and in one moment ended the entirety of Holofernes' army. She didn't have time to fool around. She went alone into battle. David went alone into battle. What is it that made Ruth go alone into battle? Or Judith go alone into battle? What is it that made David go alone into battle? It was something inside of their heart called the love of souls. That love that is inside of Jesus Christ. The love that is inside of the Father. And this love must be put inside of our hearts today. Because there's too great of a war around us. Too many battles being fought. Too many weapons. And there must be a desire to feed the lambs, and feed the sheep. And this we get from the heart of St. Pius X. And then also there, because it is important to note that being as I am a priest of the Society of St. Pius X, continuing the work of the Society of St. Pius X, we have to make a comment. We did yesterday, we'll do it again today, on the recent statement of Francis, who doesn't know that he's the Pope, but Francis in Rome, who is the head of the Holy Roman Catholic Church, and at this time is using his office in order to spread great evil, and in order to be a great scandal. Pope, the head of the church, he said on September the 1st, only a few days ago, in a letter written to Reno Fisichella concerning the Year of Mercy. The Year of Mercy. So many of you have already seen this, but we have this, the Year of Mercy. And in this little letter, he talks about the holy door being opened, about souls being forgiven their sins. And then at the end of the letter, he says, a final consideration. He reduces the requirements for the forgiveness of abortion. And even there, with regard to abortion, he's not very clear about the evil of abortion, though he does say that it's an injustice of some kind, doesn't say that it's murder. But nonetheless, he gets to the end of this encyclical, or this letter. A final consideration concerns those faithful who for various reasons choose to attend the churches officiated by the priests of the Fraternity of St. Pius X. This Jubilee Year of Mercy excludes no one. From various quarters, several brother bishops have told me of their good faith and sacramental practice, combined, however, with an uneasy situation from the pastoral standpoint. I trust that in the near future, solutions may be found to recover full communion with the priests and superiors of the fraternity. In the meantime, motivated by the need to respond to the good of these faithful, through my own disposition, I established that those who during the Holy Year of Mercy approach these priests of the Fraternity of St. Pius X to celebrate the sacrament of reconciliation shall validly and licitly receive the absolution of their sins. Trusting in the intercession of the Mother of Mercy, I entrust the preparations of this extraordinary Jubilee year to her protection from Vatican, 1st of September 2015. So Pope Francis says that beginning with the Year of Mercy, throughout the entirety of the Year of Mercy, the sins absolved by priests of the Society of St. Pius X, which I am one. I am a member of the Society of St. Pius X to this day. Remember that the expulsion that I received and the other priests like me received was not worth the paper that it was written on. And that the expulsion was invalid by canon law, invalid by the divine law, invalid by the moral law, invalid by every law known to man. And that therefore we remain priests of the Society of St. Pius X. And this statement that the priests of the Fraternity of St. Pius X, their confessions will be considered valid from the Holy Year, therefore applies to us. The response to the communique of the General House of the Society of St. Pius X on the letter of Pope Francis at the approach of the Holy Year, September the 1st, 2015. And here the response of the Society of St. Pius X from Menzingen. The Society of St. Pius X learned through the press of the provisions taken by Pope Francis on the occasion of the upcoming Holy Year. In the last paragraph of his letter, addressed September the 1st, 2015, to Archbishop Reno Fisichella, President of the Pontifical Commission for the Promotion of New Evangelization, the Holy Father writes, quote, I establish that those who during the Holy Year of Mercy approach these priests of the Society of St. Pius X to celebrate the sacrament of reconciliation shall validly, licitly receive the absolution of their sins, unquote. The Society of St. Pius X expresses its gratitude to the Sovereign Pontiff for his fatherly gesture. In the ministry of the Sacrament of Penance, we have always relied with all certainty on the extraordinary jurisdiction conferred by the Norma Generalis of the Code of Canon Law. On the occasion of this Holy Year, Pope Francis wants all the faithful who wish to confess to the priest of the Society of St. Pius X to be able to do so without being worried. During this year of conversion, the priests of the Society of St. Pius X will have at heart to exercise with renewed generosity their ministry in the confessional, following the example of tireless dedication which the Holy Cure of Ars gave to all priests. Menzingen, September the 1st, 2015. So the first thing to note, we have two different communications. One from Rome, from Pope Francis, September 1st, 2015, just a few days ago. The other one from Menzingen, September 1st, 2015. First thing to note is the harmony between the two documents. That Pope Francis talks about the mercy, and Pope Francis talks about that during the Holy Year, the confessions will be valid between the SSPX priests, and only SSPX priests, those priests who are outside of the SSPX, those priests that are friends of the SSPX, those priests that are in organizations that are friendly to the SSPX, their confessions, unfortunately, are not going to be merciful during the Year of Mercy. But those confessions of the priests that are members of the Fraternity of St. Pius X, there will be merciful confessions. The other ones will not be. And so it is exclusive to the Fraternity of St. Pius X and not to the others that are friends of the Society. Furthermore, that he says that he sees great hope of the solutions in the near future of the problem between the Society of St. Pius X and the new diocese. And what are these problems? They are difficult from the practical pastoral standpoint. And that there's going to be a full communion coming soon. The response of the Society of St. Pius X does not deny any of these statements. And even about the validity of the confessions. Only to say, the Society says, we have always relied with all certainty. So they're very careful to try to avoid saying that Pope Francis is wrong. Furthermore, there is contained in this response of the Menzingen several lies. One, that the Society of St. Pius X expresses its gratitude to the Sovereign Pontiff for his fatherly gesture. The gesture of the Sovereign Pontiff is not fatherly, it is rather like unto the fox. As we mentioned also yesterday, we'll mention again today, we mentioned very frequently on retreats, that in the meditation of St. Pius, of St. Ignatius, on the meditation of the three classes of men, which is made on the same day that we do the meditation on the two standards. There are three classes of men that are going to make a choice. The first class would like to do something good, but they don't do anything. It's the Veletas class. The second class want to do something good, but they have a condition, and the condition diminishes or takes away the good of their act. And the third class want to do something good only as God wants without any conditions, and that's the class that we're after. But an example which shows what the nature of a condition comes from a fable similar to Aesop's fables, that once upon a time there was a little birdie. This little birdie his mommy went off to go get food for the little birdie, and the birdie was inside of his nest. And the little birdie looked over the edge of the nest and saw the ground, and then he looked over further and saw the branch of the tree, and the birdie looked too far out of the nest, so he fell out of the nest and fell all the way down on the cold, cold ground. And the birdie wasn't happy. So the birdie stood up and went chirp, chirp, and along came a cow. And the cow came and looked at the birdie, and with the big brown eyes saw how cold the birdie was. And the cow felt sorry for the birdie. So the cow turned around, and the cow lifted up her tail, and plop, the birdie wasn't cold anymore. But the birdie still wasn't happy. And so the birdie stood up and stuck his head outside of that cow pie, and he went chirp, 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 and along came a fox. And the fox saw how dirty that birdie was, and how smelly that birdie was. And so the fox reached into the cow pie, he pulled out the birdie, and he cleaned the birdie all nice and neat. And then he ate the birdie. So what's the problem with the fox? What did the fox do? The fox saw a birdie in a cow pie. The fox saw the birdie needed to be cleaned up. And the fox very carefully and fastidiously cleaned the birdie up. So neatly. You should have seen the fox clean that birdie, making sure there wasn't any poop anywhere. How kind was that fox? Why? Because he didn't want to eat the stuff. What was the reason why he cleaned the birdie? What was the reason why he pulled the birdie out of the cow pie? It was because it was time for breakfast. Now, what does moral theology say about that? When a good act, or a seemingly good act, is done for a condition only, that act equals always a mortal sin. The great example in moral theology normally is a charlatan. The charlatan who sees an old lady and takes care of the old lady and is nice to the old lady and good to the old lady and takes care of all of her needs and gets her medication. Next thing you know, she signs a little paper. And all the money goes to the charlatan. And what happens to all those good acts, all those acts of charity? Every single one of them was a mortal sin. And what is the duty of the shepherd? And what is the duty of the cow? And what is the duty of the ones who recognize what is going on? They are to go and to tell the old lady, this man is no good. He is not doing good to you. He is doing evil to you. And his purpose is to destroy you and take away all that you have. It's like going into the house of Grandma and seeing Little Red Riding Hood there at Grandma's house. Well, you know that is Grandma's bed. And those are Grandma's sheets. And that is Grandma's dress. I know the eyes are a bit big, teeth are a bit sharp, but maybe she changed out her false teeth. And so, I'm not saying it's Grandma. I'm not telling you it's Grandma. You have to make your own decision. I'm just saying that's Grandma's dress. That's Grandma's bed. Those are Grandma's sheets. And I just hope you make the right choice. Goodbye. What happens to that man? He is to be executed. Because what is the duty of the shepherd? To tell Little Red Riding Hood, that's not Grandma. Exit immediately. That is not Grandma. That is the wolf. And one of the primary duties of the shepherd is to warn of wolves in sheep's clothing, of which Christ spoke of in the gospel. He said, there will come wolves in the clothing of sheep. And this example we have in the September the 1st, 2015 letter of Pope Francis. It is the word of a wolf. It is the action of a wolf whose purpose is to destroy the sheep of our Lord Jesus Christ, whose purpose is to eat them and consume them and drag them away from the kingdom of Christ, and drag them away from the truth, and drag them into the snare of modernist conciliar Rome, which is not the Rome of our Lord Jesus Christ. That's what the purpose of this wicked document is. And to be grateful for it is evil. And to say that it's a fatherly gesture is a lie. It's a lie. Cannot say that it is an accident. It is a lie. Notice what is the purpose of these two documents? To prepare souls to be gobbled up by the wolf. That's the purpose. And what will it do? It will cause greater confusion in souls. And what is the duty of the shepherd? To warn against it. There are many lies in this little paragraph of Pope Francis. One, of course, is that if the confessions will become valid on the Saturday before, I'm guessing the Holy Year begins on the first Sunday of Advent, which means that first Vespers on the Saturday before, so 4 p.m. So if you go to confession at 3:59 and get absolved, you're out of luck. But if it's 4:01, you're absolved. And so, because that's the first Vespers, so at 4:01 you get absolved all the way up until the next year, at which point you better go to confession before 3:59. Because then at 4 o'clock, it ends and your confessions become invalid again. No such thing as putting confessions in a time limit. And then what is it that makes them valid for this period of time? He says, I operate by my own disposition. To accept it is very similar to accepting the lifting of the excommunications. To accept the lifting of the excommunications means that we accept the excommunications, and that is a lie. And then when the 4 bishops accepted the lifting of excommunications, they did wrong before God. We can't accept the lifting of excommunications that are not valid. We cannot accept the lifting, we cannot accept that we receive back into a church that we have never left. We cannot accept the removal of a fault that was not there. Particularly when this fault is the fault of defending the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, defending the priesthood of our Lord Jesus Christ, and working for the salvation of souls. The confessions, not only of Society of St. Pius X priests, but the confessions of every traditional priest who is trying to defend the Holy Roman Catholic faith, all these confessions are valid. Because the church has a law called Epikeia. And this law of Epikeia is a real law, a real principle of law. The purpose of law is the salvation of souls. And the necessity of the sheep makes the validity of the confessions, the validity of the marriages, the validity of all the juridically required acts in the church. We don't need the approval of a modernist. And as Archbishop Lefebvre said in 1974, we must stand in the same stance against the reforms and all the reforms that come from Vatican II until such time as the light of faith shines again over eternal Rome. When the light of faith shines again over eternal Rome, that will be the time that we will be all back in. There will be no need of any approvals, because Rome will have returned to the truth which we hold, and therefore we will be connected again. No need of any new approvals. All we do is wait until the light of faith shines over Rome again. Notice this very grave violation of the declaration of Archbishop Lefebvre in 1974. There is no waiting for the light of faith to shine over Rome. And the new decree is statements of Menzingen. All we want to be is approved by the modernists in Rome. We want to be approved by the enemies of God, who are still acting as the enemies of God. We don't want to be reproved by the enemies of God after they repent. We want to be reproved by the enemies of God who are presently acting as the enemies of God, who are presently working very actively for the destruction of the Catholic faith and for the destruction of Christendom. In August of 2015, just a month ago, or maybe it was still July, Pope Francis said in Argentina, "Be ready for the Synod of October. Be ready to be scandalized." That's Pope Francis's announcement about the upcoming Synod. You will be scandalized, because we're going to do evil at this Synod. So he tells us in August, be ready to be scandalized in October when we approve of homosexuality. Be ready to be scandalized in October when we give Holy Communion to those that are living outside of the Catholic marriage and living in sin. Be ready to be scandalized when we open the door to all manner of immorality as being now moral in the church. And now in between the scandal announcement of August and the scandal coming in October, we have a station break to give mercy to the Society of St. Pius X. This is a mockery of God. It's a mockery of the first commandment. It's a mockery also of the whole crisis of the last 40 years, the last 50 years. And what happened to the charity aspect? The New Society is all about charity. The New Society says that we are too judgmental in the resistance. Well, what about their friends? What about the priests that are living in our priories? What about the priests who are not mentioned in this decree of Rome? What about them? No care about them. No care whatsoever. It is not a fatherly gesture, it's a demonic gesture. And then also later on in the same document, coming from Menzingen, on the occasion of this holy year, Pope Francis wants all the faithful who wish to confess to the priest of the Society of St. Pius X to be able to do so without being worried. So we're going to give an interpretation of the Pope's document. If you go to confession at 3:59, before the first Sunday of Advent, be worried. If you go to confession at 4:01, don't be worried. According to Bishop Fillet. But if you go to confession at 3:59, according to Pope Francis, it's invalid. And you go to confession at 4:01, it's valid. And so Pope Francis clearly means valid, invalid, whereas the Society of St. Pius X says he means worried, not worried. So the real answer is, don't worry, be happy after the 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the first Sunday of Advent, and then don't be happy, worry if it's before. This is foolishness, and it's another lie, another lie. And so the confess the priest Society of Pius X, so they don't need to be worried. And it's making excuses in lies. It is the duty of the shepherd to warn, and this warning is not being done. And this is the latest example of leading souls away from God. And what is the language? The confused language, this soft speak, it is not a new speak. This language is found in Pascendi in 1907. And what about the heresies of Pope Francis? They are also not new heresies. These heresies are also contained exactly in Pascendi in 1907. They are the same errors condemned by St. Pius X 110 years later. And these same errors that are being practiced by the Society of St. Pius X and by modernist Rome. And what about the love of souls? What is it that made St. Pius X able to fight the love of souls? And we have to pray for the love of souls to enter back into the priests of the church. Somewhere along the line it's fallen out. Somewhere along the line it's been forgotten. And because there's so many darts, so many weapons, so many attacks on every side, each one is getting into a survival mode. I just want to survive. I just want to survive. I just need to live the next day, the next minute, the next moment, the next thing. I'm just trying to survive. St. Pius X knew that, humanly speaking, he had an impossible task. And what did he do? He got busy immediately, right away. He took action instantaneously. He went right to the lowest priest, that if you're going to be a subdeacon, if you're going to be a deacon, if you're going to be a priest, you will take this anti-modernist oath. You will declare that you're going to fight against modernism. He spent over half the encyclical writing about the bishops. If you find that there's a modernist book, burn it. If you find there's a modernist publication house, declare it no longer a Catholic publication house. You find a book which has a stench of modernism, a touch of modernism in it, stop the book completely. If you find a seminarian or a priest who is not practicing, who shows signs of modernism, throw him out. He took action. And the action delayed Vatican II more than 50 years. The action caused the salvation of millions and millions of souls. The action was a huge battle against hell. And the action benefits us to this very day, because without the statements of St. Pius X in Pascendi, we would not be able to have the answer to these wicked lies of the modern man. He put it all in one little encyclical, which is inspired by heaven. And he was able to explain, here are the traps of the modernists, here are the lies of the modernists, here are 7 heads of the modernists, here's the way of the modernists. And these wicked men cannot be defeated by natural means. We will have recourse to supernatural means. And therefore Our Lady, to fight the modernists, told in 1917 that the miracles of Fatima, and then told in 1929 that we will defeat the heresy of evolution, of modernism, of communism, of the wickedness of the modern age by consecrating Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, by obeying the will of heaven. And we have to have confidence once again in supernatural means. Supernatural means. And that's the reason why I think God is allowing us. He's allowing us from time to time to have darts, to have fights, to have battles, to have confusion a little bit amongst souls, to see who is going to have confidence, who is going to resort to faith, who is going to resort to the supernatural means to win this war against hell. Our Lord has already won the battle. Heaven has already won the battle. The only question is, where do we fit in this fight? In any case, try to remain faithful to the spirit of St. Pius X, and we must continue the work of this society. And by the grace of God, the protection of Blessed Virgin Mary, we'll be able to save our souls and lead other souls to the kingdom of heaven. We have to have the love of souls, the love of God, And in order, without this, it's impossible to persevere in the present fight. God bless you all. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost.